Sometimes, one word can shake the entire political landscape. When President Trump dropped a bomb on live TV, not out of rage, but in response to Venezuela's dictator offering his nation's resources, it wasn't just a soundbite. It was a signal, a message to the world that the old rules of diplomacy were over. And just hours later, as Democrats threatened to prosecute ICE agents and protesters swarmed detention centers, it became clear this wasn't random. It was coordinated chaos. And Trump's blunt response may have set off a chain reaction that's only beginning to unfold. So, what's really happening behind the scenes? And why are both Venezuela and the American border suddenly part of the same story? Let's break it down. The moment Trump responded to a question about Venezuela's dictator, Nicolas Maduro, offering everything his country's oil, natural resources, even a recorded message in English pleading for mediation, Trump didn't mince words. He said Maduro was offering everything because he didn't want to mess around with the United States. And, he used a word that gets bleeped and makes headlines. And I know what you're thinking. A president using language like that on camera in front of reporters. It sounds like chaos. But here's the thing. It wasn't chaos at all. It was clarity. And if you've been watching politics long enough, you know the difference. But let's zoom out for a second. Why did this moment matter so much? Because for years, America has played a careful diplomatic dance with dictators. We've used soft language, sent envoys, negotiated behind closed doors, and often got very little in return. We've watched as regimes in Venezuela, Cuba, and other parts of Latin America pushed back against American interests, while we responded with cautious words and drawn-out sanctions. Trump's language wasn't just crass. It was a rejection of that entire framework. It was him saying out loud what a lot of Americans have been thinking for decades. Enough is enough. Think about it this way. Imagine you're in a negotiation. The other side knows they're in trouble. They're losing ground. They're desperate. So they come to you and say, I'll give you anything, just help me out. Now, if you've ever been in business or raised a family or even dealt with a pushy salesperson, you know what that desperation smells like. And you know that the moment you show weakness, the moment you give in out of pity or politeness, you lose your leverage. Trump didn't give in. He didn't even pretend to. He called it what it was, desperation, and moved on. And that's where this gets interesting. Because while Trump was making headlines with his blunt talk, another leader was arriving in Washington. A leader who's been at the center of one of the most expensive, most controversial foreign policy debates in recent American history. I'm talking about Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He came to meet with Trump, and he came with a request. More weapons, more support, more Tomahawk missiles. And during a press conference, a reporter asked him a question that I think a lot of Americans have been waiting to hear. What concessions are you willing to make to end this war? Now, pause there for a moment, because that question, that simple, direct question, is the kind of thing we rarely hear anymore. We're used to reporters asking softball questions or gotcha questions, or questions designed to make one side look bad and the other side look good. But this was a real question, a question about accountability. A question about whether endless American funding and American weapons are actually bringing us closer to peace or just deeper into someone else's war. Zelensky's answer was polite. He talked about sitting down, about needing a ceasefire, about pushing Putin to the negotiation table. But he didn't answer the question. He didn't say what he'd give up. He didn't say whether Ukraine would drop its demand to join NATO. He didn't offer a concession. And Trump didn't push him. He listened. He acknowledged the complexity. He mentioned that he'd had a productive talk with Putin the day before. And then he said something that I think sums up his entire approach. We're not in this to sell weapons. We're in this to end the war. That's a fundamentally different philosophy than what we've seen in Washington for the last several decades. It's not about making deals that benefit defense contractors. It's not about looking tough on the world stage. It's about results. It's about getting people to stop dying and getting America out of endless commitments that drain our resources and our focus. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because while Trump was being criticized for not immediately handing over advanced missiles, while he was being painted as hesitant or weak or, and this is my favorite, somehow under Putin's influence, something else was happening. The media was doing what it does best, spinning a narrative. One outlet ran a headline that said, Putin's mini-coup in the White House has beaten Zelensky to the punch with Trump.
Another suggested that Putin had sneaked in a call before Zelensky arrived, turning Trump back to his side after the president had drifted towards democracy. Let that sink in for a second. The implication is that by not immediately agreeing to give Ukraine every weapon they ask for, Trump was somehow abandoning democracy itself. That's not journalism. That's propaganda. And if you've lived through the Cold War, if you remember when the news was about facts and not about pushing a political agenda, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't about informing the public. It's about shaping how the public thinks. It's about making sure that anyone who questions endless foreign entanglements is labeled as unpatriotic or compromised or dangerous. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying we shouldn't support our allies. I'm not saying Ukraine doesn't deserve help. What I'm saying is that we need to ask hard questions. We need to demand accountability. We need to know what the end game is. Because right now, we're watching billions of dollars flow overseas while our own borders are in chaos. Our own communities are struggling. And our own citizens, especially seniors living on fixed incomes, are trying to figure out how to afford groceries and gas. And speaking of chaos, let's talk about what's happening right here at home. Because while the media was busy turning Trump's meeting with Zelensky into a scandal, something very real and very dangerous was unfolding in Illinois. There's a place called Broadview, just outside Chicago. It's home to an ICE detention facility, a processing center for individuals who are in the country illegally and have been convicted of violent crimes. We're talking about gang members, repeat offenders, people who've committed serious crimes and are awaiting deportation. For weeks, protesters have been gathering outside this facility. They were loud, they were organized, and they were angry. Local authorities put up barriers and fencing to protect the facility, to keep officers safe and to maintain order. But then a federal judge stepped in and ordered those barriers removed. Now think about that for a second. A judge, someone who's supposed to uphold the law, ordered the removal of security measures designed to protect federal officers doing their jobs. And what happened next? Exactly what you'd expect. The protesters, emboldened, pushed closer, they blocked streets, they clashed with police. Additional officers had to be called in. The situation escalated. And through it all, the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, didn't call for calm. He didn't tell people to respect the law. He didn't defend the officers who were just trying to do their jobs. Instead, he made a threat. He said that when Democrats come back into power, when they control Congress again, people are going to be held accountable. And he wasn't talking about the protesters. He was talking about the ICE agents. Let me say that again. The governor of a state threatened federal law enforcement officers with future prosecution for doing their jobs, for enforcing immigration law, for removing dangerous criminals from American streets. He said Democrats should follow the law. But apparently that only applies when it's convenient, when it's politically useful, when it helps them win elections and score points with their base. This is the world we're living in now. A world where enforcing the law makes you the villain. A world where protecting your community makes you a target. And it's not just rhetoric. It's not just talk. Because while Governor Pritzker is making his threats, while protesters were storming ICE facilities, a man in Kenosha, Wisconsin was arrested. His name is Andrew Stanton, and federal prosecutors say he posted multiple videos on TikTok calling for people to shoot ICE agents. In one video, he said, "If ICE shows up to your neighborhood, it's time to start shooting at them." He targeted a specific agent by name. He sent threatening messages. He referenced mass shootings. He said, quote, "When there are mass shootings, they're successful. People die and people are terrorized. You could apply that to other people, federal agents." He even sent a meme glorifying political violence with a caption that said, "This should be a lesson on how to deal with fascists. You don't debate them, you delete them." This isn't some random internet troll. This is someone who believes, genuinely believes, that killing federal agents is justified, that it's righteous, that it's necessary. And where do you think he got that idea? Where do you think he learned to see ICE officers as fascists, as enemies, as targets? He got it from the same media that calls Trump a dictator. He got it from the same politicians who threaten prosecution.
He got it from the same activists who chant abolish ICE and block detention centers and call law enforcement officers Nazis. Words have consequences.
Ideas have power. And when you spend years dehumanizing a group of people, when you label them as evil, when you tell your followers that they're a threat to democracy itself, someone, somewhere is going to take that seriously. Now let's talk about what ICE actually does, because if you only listen to the loudest voices, you'd think ICE agents spend their days rounding up innocent families and tearing children from their parents' arms. But that's not the reality. The reality is that ICE targets the worst of the worst. They use intelligence. They use data. They focus on individuals who have criminal records, people convicted of violent crimes, gang members, repeat offenders, traffickers. These aren't people who made a mistake. These aren't people who overstay a visa and are just trying to make a better life. These are dangerous individuals who pose a real threat to American communities. And when ICE removes them, when they deport them, they're making our neighborhoods safer. They're protecting families. They're upholding the law. But you won't hear that on the evening news. You won't see that in the headlines because it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't support the agenda. And so instead, we get stories about cruelty and injustice and authoritarianism. We get politicians like J.B. Pritzker saying that ICE agents should be prosecuted. We get protesters blocking streets and judges ordering the removal of security barriers. And we get people like Andrew Stanton calling for violence. So where does that leave us? Right now, in this moment, America is caught in a strange and dangerous place. On one hand, we have a president who's willing to speak bluntly, to reject bad deals, to put American interest first, even if it means offending people or breaking with diplomatic tradition. On the other hand, we have a political and media establishment that's determined to resist him at every turn, to paint every move as dangerous, to stoke division and fear and anger. And in the middle, we have ordinary Americans, people like you, trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out who to trust, trying to understand what's really happening. And honestly, I think that's the key, understanding. Because the more you dig into these stories, the more you see the patterns. You see the same tactics over and over again, the same distortions, the same manipulations. Whether it's Venezuela or Ukraine or ICE or gas prices or anything else, the game is always the same. Create a crisis, blame your opponents, and use the chaos to gain power. But here's the thing. You don't have to play along. You don't have to accept the narrative. You can ask questions. You can demand evidence. You can think for yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to keep doing here. Because while the world spins and the headlines scream and the politicians make their threats, there's a bigger picture forming. A picture that includes not just foreign policy and border security, but also the economy, energy, technology, and the future of this country. And if you stick with me, we're going to explore all of it. Because here's what they don't want you to know. While all this chaos is swirling, while protesters are blocking ICE facilities and governors are making threats and the media is painting federal agents as villains, those same agents are out there every single day doing something that actually matters. They're making our communities safer. And I want to take a moment to talk about what that actually looks like, because the gap between reality and the story you're being told is wider than you might think. When an ICE officer goes to work in the morning, they're not just randomly picking people off the street. They're working from intelligence packages. They're following leads. They're targeting specific individuals who have been identified as threats. We're talking about members of Tren de Aragua. That's the Venezuelan gang that's been spreading across American cities, involved in everything from robbery to human trafficking. We're talking about MS-13 members. We're talking about convicted sex offenders, people who have committed crimes against children, people who have been deported before and came back, people with outstanding warrants, people with rap sheets that would make your stomach turn. And when ICE removes these individuals, when they take them into custody and begin the deportation process, they're not doing it in secret. They post the details. They share the criminal records. They tell the stories of who these people are and what they've done because they know that the only way to counter the lies is with the truth.
The only way to fight back against the narrative that they're jackbooted thugs is to show in black and white exactly who they're removing from our neighborhoods. And yet somehow, that never seems to make the news. Somehow, when an ICE operation successfully removes a convicted gang member or a repeat violent offender, it doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't get covered by the cable networks. It doesn't become part of the conversation. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. Because it would complicate the story. Because it would force people to confront an uncomfortable truth, that ICE enforcement, when done right, protects American lives, and that the people trying to stop that enforcement, the people threatening agents and calling for violence and demanding the abolition of ICE, they're not the heroes.
They're putting Americans at risk. Now, let's shift gears for a moment. Because while all of this is happening, while the border is in chaos, and Venezuela is scrambling, and Ukraine is asking for more weapons, and ICS is under attack, something else has been quietly unfolding. Something that doesn't get nearly as much attention, but might actually matter more to your daily life than any of these headline-grabbing stories. I'm talking about the economy. Specifically, I'm talking about energy. And even more specifically, I'm talking about gas prices. Remember when the president said, "Drill, baby, drill"? Remember when he promised to make America energy independent again? To bring down costs? To stop begging foreign countries for oil? Well, it's happening. The United States just set an all-time record for oil production. We're pumping more oil out of the ground than we ever have before, and that's starting to show up at the pump. The national average for a gallon of regular gasoline has dropped to around $3.70. That's about a nickel cheaper than a week ago, a dime cheaper than a month ago. And in some states, it's even better. 33 states now have average gas prices below $3 a gallon. Oklahoma's leading the way at around $2.57. Now, if you're living on a fixed income, if you're a senior trying to stretch your Social Security check, trying to figure out how to afford groceries and medications and everything else, every penny counts. When you fill up your tank, those nickels and dimes add up fast. And when gas prices drop, it doesn't just mean cheaper trips to the store. It means lower costs for shipping and transportation, which eventually means lower costs on everything from food to clothing to household goods. It's a ripple effect, and it's one of those rare examples of a campaign promise that's actually being kept. But here's the thing. It's not just about drilling more oil. It's not just about going back to the old ways, because the world is changing. Technology is advancing. And if we're smart, if we're willing to think beyond the old political battles, there are opportunities here that go way beyond just pumping more fossil fuels out of the ground. Let me tell you something personal for a second. I believe in innovation. I believe in using the best tool for the job. And when it comes to transportation, I think we've been stuck in an either-or mindset that doesn't really make sense. On one side, you've got people who say we need to ban gas cars, force everyone into electric vehicles, and save the planet. On the other side, you've got people who say electric vehicles are a scam. They're unreliable. They're being shoved down our throats by the government. And honestly, both sides are missing the point. Here's the reality. If you're someone who drives a lot, if you're taking long road trips, if you live in a rural area, if you need the range and flexibility of a gas-powered vehicle, then yeah, stick with gas. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're someone who mostly drives around town, if you're going to the grocery store, to church, to visit friends, to the doctor's office, and then back home, an electric vehicle can save you a ton of money. You're not stopping for gas, you're not dealing with oil changes and exhaust systems and all the maintenance that comes with a traditional engine. You just plug it in at night like you do with your phone, and you're ready to go in the morning. And I'm not talking about government mandates, I'm not talking about subsidies or tax credits or forcing anyone to do anything. I'm talking about giving people options. about letting technology and the market work together to create solutions that actually make sense for real people. Because that's how progress happens, not through top-down control, not through politicians telling you what you can and can't buy, but through innovation, competition, and freedom of choice. And that's the kind of thinking we need more of. Not just on cars, not just on energy, but on everything. Because the problems we're facing, whether it's foreign wars or border security or inflation or crime, they're not going to be solved by doing the same things we've always done. They're going to be solved by people who are willing to question assumptions, challenge the status quo, and think differently. So let's zoom out one more time and look at the bigger picture. Because when you step back and look at everything we've talked about, Trump's blunt response to Venezuela, his cautious approach to Ukraine, the media spin, the attacks on ICS, the threats from politicians, the actual rise of violence against federal agents, the falling gas prices, the potential of new technology, what you're really seeing is a country at a crossroads. On one path, we have a vision of America that's built on strength, clarity, and self-reliance. A vision where we don't apologize for putting American interests first, where we don't get dragged into endless wars, where we enforce our laws, protect our borders, and support the people who do the hard work of keeping us safe, where we harness our natural resources, embrace innovation, and give people the freedom to make their own choices. It's not a perfect vision. It's not without risk, but it's honest, and it's grounded in the belief that America works best when Americans are free, secure, and prosperous. A vision where America is constantly apologizing, constantly deferring, constantly trying to please everyone and offend no one. Where we pour billions of dollars into foreign conflicts with no clear endgame, where we prioritize the feelings of illegal immigrants over the safety of American citizens, where we demonize law enforcement and empower criminals, where we let the media and the political elite tell us what to think, what to say, and what to believe, where we surrender our energy independence to foreign powers and our economic freedom to government control. And here's the uncomfortable truth: we're living in both of those worlds right now. They're colliding, they're fighting for dominance, and the outcome of that fight is going to shape the next decade of American life. It's going to determine what kind of country your grandchildren inherit. It's going to determine whether we remain a nation of laws or become a nation of mobs, whether we're governed by principles or by panic. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This all sounds so overwhelming, so complicated. How am I supposed to make sense of it? How am I supposed to know what's true and what's spin? And I get it. I really do, because the truth is, it is complicated. There are no easy answers. There are trade-offs and risks and uncertainties in every direction. But here's what I've learned, both from watching the world and from building things that matter. Clarity comes from asking the right questions. Don't just ask, who's saying this? Ask, what are they not saying? Don't just ask, what happened? Ask, why did it happen? And who benefits? Don't just accept the headline. Dig into the details. Look at the numbers. Listen to the people who are actually on the ground doing the work, living the reality. Compare what you're being told to what you can see with your own eyes. And most importantly, don't let anyone tell you that you're not smart enough to understand. You've lived through decades of history. You've seen wars and recessions and social movements and technological revolutions. You know what works and what doesn't. You know when someone is being straight with you and when they're blowing smoke. Trust that knowledge. Trust your instincts. And don't be afraid to speak up when something doesn't add up. Because here's the thing, the people in power, the people who benefit from the status quo, they're counting on you to stay quiet. They're counting on you to be confused, overwhelmed, disengaged. They're counting on you to tune out, to throw up your hands and say, it's all too much. I can't keep up. But if you do that, if enough people do that, then the loudest voices win. The most radical voices win. The people who want to tear things down instead of build them up, they win. And I don't think that's what you want. I don't think that's what most Americans want. I think most people, regardless of their politics, want the same basic things. They want safety, they want fairness, they want opportunity, they want to be able to trust that the people in charge are looking out for the country, not just themselves. They want to believe that if you work hard, play by the rules, and treat people with respect, you'll be okay, that your family will be okay, that the future will be better than the past. And you know what? That's not too much to ask. That's not unreasonable. That's not some utopian fantasy. It's the promise that America has always tried to live up to. And it's the promise that's worth fighting for. So what happens next? That depends on whether Americans, especially those who've lived through decades of political spin, can see past the noise and focus on results. Trump's response to Venezuela wasn't just a reaction. It was a warning shot to the world and a mirror to our own divisions at home. His handling of the Ukraine situation, his support for energy independence, his refusal to back down in the face of media attacks. These aren't random acts. They're part of a larger strategy, a strategy that says America doesn't have to choose between being strong and being smart, that we can protect our interests without getting dragged into quagmires, that we can enforce our laws without apologizing for it, that we can innovate and adapt without surrendering our values. But none of that happens automatically. It requires engagement. It requires attention. It requires people like you to stay informed, stay involved, and stay vocal. Because at the end of the day, this is still a democracy. And in a democracy, the people who show up, the people who speak up, the people who refuse to be silenced or intimidated, they're the ones who shape the future. If you've watched this far, you already know this channel is about truth, not theater. It's about substance, not spin. It's about giving you the information and the perspective you need to make up your own mind. And that's exactly what we're going to keep doing. So make sure you're part of the conversation. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me below. Do you think Trump's tough talk is what America needs, or is it fanning the fire? Do you believe ICE agents should be protected and supported, or prosecuted and restrained? And when it comes to the bigger picture, energy, technology, foreign policy, what do you think matters most right now? Let's hear your thoughts, because what happens next begins with how we think right now. The story isn't over, it's just getting started. And if we're paying attention, if we're thinking clearly, if we're willing to ask hard questions and demand real answers, then maybe, just maybe, we can steer this thing in the right direction. Thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and thanks for being part of this community.